April 7, 1945, 6:34 in the morning. Chofu Airfield, 20 miles west of Tokyo. Captain Masao Siyanaga's leather gloves creaked against the control stick of his Nakajima Ki-84 Hate fighter. The morning air tasted of aviation fuel and dew. At 28 years old, with 3 years of continuous combat behind him, Siyanaga had learned to read the subtle signs that separated routine patrols from moments that changed history. This morning felt different. Through his canopy, he watched Sergeant Yamamoto sprint across the tarmac, his normally disciplined movements replaced by something approaching panic. Captain, emergency scramble. Unknown fighters approaching from the southeast. Siyanaga's blood turned to ice. Southeast meant from the ocean. Southeast meant from Iwo Jima, which American Marines had captured 5 weeks earlier. But Iwo Jima sat 660 miles from Tokyo, far beyond the range of any fighter aircraft in existence. The physics were impossible. Every fighter pilot understood the cruel equation. Range demanded sacrifice. More fuel meant less armor, fewer weapons, reduced performance. Japan's legendary Zero had achieved its famous range by stripping away pilot protection until it became what veterans privately called a flying coffin. American fighters represented the opposite philosophy. The P-47 Thunderbolt packed 8.50 caliber machine guns and could absorb punishment that would atomize a Zero. But its combat radius barely exceeded 300 miles. This fundamental limitation had given Japanese home defense a critical advantage. As long as American fighters couldn't reach the mainland, pilots like Siyanaga could focus entirely on destroying unescorted bombers. Southeast. Siyanaga's voice carried disbelief. That's impossible. No fighter has that range. The Nakajima Ha-45 engine roared to life. As Siyanaga's fighter climbed toward 15,000 feet, he caught his first glimpse of them through the morning haze. Silver glints in the distance. Not the dark blue of carrier fighters, but polished natural metal that caught the rising sun with defiant visibility. And they were hunting. All units, this is Tokyo Control. The radio transmission carried barely controlled panic. Unidentified single-engine fighters conducting attacks over central Tokyo. Type unknown. Origin unknown. All interceptors scramble immediately. As his fighter climbed through 10,000 feet, Siyanaga counted them. 20, perhaps more. They moved with aggressive confidence, not the cautious fuel conservation of long-range intruders at their endurance limit. One terrifying question echoed through his mind. How did American fighters get all the way to Tokyo? To understand the shock coursing through Siyanaga's veins, you must grasp what Japanese pilots knew with absolute certainty about fighter aircraft in 1945. Every fighter followed immutable laws of physics. More range meant less performance. Longer missions meant pilots limping home on fumes, praying their engines wouldn't quit. Lieutenant Akira Watanabe, scrambling from Haneda Airfield in his Kawasaki Ki-61, had built his entire tactical doctrine around this reality. At 0647 hours, climbing through 12,000 feet, Watanabe spotted them first, sleek silver aircraft diving toward the Nakajima aircraft factory at Musashino. But something was wrong. These weren't bombers. They were single-engine fighters, operating with the aggressive confidence of aircraft from their home base. Control, this is Lightning 3, Watanabe transmitted. I count 20, maybe 30 single-engine fighters. Type unknown. They're attacking Musashino. The radio exploded with confused chatter. American fighters operating over the heart of Japan, 660 miles from any known base, flying with fuel reserves that defied every assumption about aerial warfare. Watanabe watched as one silver fighter completed its attack run, pulled up sharply, and jettisoned its external fuel tanks. They're dropping tanks. Watanabe transmitted. But they shouldn't have fuel already. They had to fly over 600 miles just to reach Tokyo. What Watanabe couldn't know was that he was witnessing the P-51D Mustang operating at peak capability. The aircraft dropping tanks still carried nearly 200 gallons of internal fuel, enough for over an hour of combat and the long flight home. The Mustang's secret lay in near-perfect marriage of airframe efficiency and engine performance. North American Aviation's design team had created an airframe with exceptionally low drag. The laminar flow wing reduced drag by 15% compared to conventional designs. But the real revolution came from the engine. The British Rolls-Royce Merlin, license-built by Packard as the V1650, produced 1,695 horsepower while achieving fuel economy that bordered on miraculous. The two-stage supercharger maintained engine performance at high altitude without massive fuel consumption. The result: a fighter carrying 489 gallons total fuel, 269 internal plus two 110-gallon external tanks. At cruise settings, the Merlin consumed approximately 60 gallons per hour, giving theoretical endurance over 8 hours. The mathematics were revolutionary. 660 miles from Iwo Jima to Tokyo consumed approximately 120 gallons. 1 hour of combat used another 90 gallons. Return journey, another 120 gallons. Total, 330 gallons, leaving 160 gallons safety margin. Japanese pilots, accustomed to fighters arriving at distant targets with fuel measured in minutes, couldn't conceive of such abundance. 6:58 in the morning. 15,000 feet above central Tokyo. Major Robert W. Moore, leading 4P-51DS from the 15th Fighter Group's 45th Squadron, spotted the Key 84 formation climbing toward the bomber stream. His calm voice carried across the radio: "Blue flight, drop tanks, and engage." The 4 Mustangs jettisoned their external tanks simultaneously. Moore banked sharply right, positioning for an overhead attack. As his Mustang accelerated in its diving attack, the airspeed indicator climbed past 400 miles per hour. Tsuyonaga saw them coming. 4 silver aircraft in perfect formation, diving with predatory confidence. He pulled hard left, trying to spoil their attack angle. Moore's first burst came from 500 yards. 6.50 caliber machine guns fired in perfect synchronization, creating a stream of projectiles at 4,800 rounds per minute combined. Tsuyonaga felt his aircraft shudder as bullets walked across his left wing. Warning lights illuminated as hydraulic pressure dropped. But Moore wasn't flying like a long-range intruder trying to conserve fuel. He was flying like he had all the time in the world. "Blue 3, cover me," Moore transmitted. "I'm going around again. Going around again." The casual confidence in those words represented everything wrong about this engagement from the Japanese perspective. A fighter 660 miles from base, voluntarily extending combat, maneuvering aggressively enough to burn fuel at 3 times normal rates. For 3 minutes, the 2 fighters twisted through the sky. Tsuyonaga threw everything he knew into the engagement. But the American matched him turn for turn, always aggressive, always confident. Each 360-degree turn burned nearly 3 gallons of fuel. Tsuyonaga had perhaps 18 gallons left for combat. He could sustain this turning fight for 6 more circles before fuel exhaustion forced him to break off. Moore had no such constraints. His Mustang carried over 150 gallons at this point. He could turn with Tsuyonaga for 30 minutes or more. After 3 complete circles, Tsuyonaga's fuel warning light illuminated. He had perhaps 10 gallons remaining, enough for 5 minutes at combat power. "I have to disengage," Tsuyonaga transmitted. "Fuel critical." He rolled inverted and pulled through into a split S, trading altitude for speed in a desperate dive toward the deck. Moore followed instantly, the Mustang's superior dive characteristics maintaining perfect firing position. At 8,000 feet, Moore squeezed his trigger. 6.50 caliber machine guns spoke in unison. The stream of projectiles walked across Tsuyonaga's right wing and fuselage. The Japanese pilot felt the impacts like hammer blows. His fuel tank exploded in a spray of vaporized gasoline. His engine seized as coolant lines severed. At 6,000 feet, with no power and smoke filling his cockpit, Captain Masao Tsuyonaga pulled the canopy release and kicked himself free. The parachute opened at 4,000 feet. As he descended toward Tokyo's ruins, Tsuyonaga watched the Silver Mustangs continue their attacks, flying with casual confidence of aircraft with nowhere else to be, fuel for hours more combat if needed. His last conscious thought before landing: if they can come this far and fight this hard, we have already lost the war. 3 miles away, Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura found himself engaged with 2 P-51DS simultaneously. They coordinated their attacks with precision that spoke of endless training and absolute confidence. "Control, this is Lightning 3, Nakamura broadcast frantically. These fighters, they're not conserving fuel. How is this possible? Captain John B. Hampshire, leading the Mustang section, made a casual radio call that would have been incomprehensible to Japanese pilots listening. Red 3 and 4, we've got a single bogey. Let's go say hello. Remember, we've got plenty of gas, so take your time. Plenty of gas. 660 miles from base. After flying nearly 3 hours, and these American pilots discussed fuel as if on a training flight near home. For 4 minutes, Nakamura threw everything at the two Mustangs. Tight turning circles that should have forced them to disengage or burn catastrophic fuel. Vertical maneuvers that should have created tactical opportunities. Nothing worked. The two P-51DS worked together with practiced precision, both flying with aggressive confidence that ignored every rule of long-range fighter operations. At the 6-minute mark, Nakamura's fuel warning illuminated. He had perhaps 8 gallons remaining, enough for 10 minutes at cruise power or 3 minutes at combat settings. Control, I am Winchester on fuel. Breaking off engagement. These fighters show no signs of fuel concern. How is this possible? Hampshire heard the transmission. Red 4, he's running. Let's show him why that won't work anymore. The two Mustangs rolled inverted and followed the key, 61 into its desperate dive, accelerating effortlessly to match the Japanese fighter's escape attempt. At 500 yards, Hampshire opened fire, a 2-second burst that sent 160 rounds toward the fleeing fighter. Nakamura's aircraft shuddered as bullets ripped through his wing and tail. His rudder jammed, control cables severed. His engine coughed as fuel pressure dropped. Hampshire and his wingman followed for another 30 seconds, then broke off. They had made their point. Red 3, check your fuel status. Red 4 shows 140 gallons remaining. Plenty for the trip home, plus an hour reserve. 140 gallons. After 3 hours of flight, combat over Tokyo, aggressive maneuvering. The numbers defied everything Japanese pilots knew about aerial warfare. Nakamura's Ki 61 ran out of fuel at 800 feet, 2 miles short of Haneda. He dead-sticked into a bombed-out parking lot, wheels touching cracked concrete at 110 miles per hour. Climbing out of his damaged fighter, hands shaking, Nakamura looked up at the sky where the silver Mustangs had disappeared toward the south. Back toward Iwo Jima, 660 miles away. His first report to intelligence officers captured the strategic revolution in simple terms. The Americans have developed a fighter that can reach anywhere in our empire and still fight with full combat endurance. Previous assumptions about fighter range limitations are no longer valid. By 8 in the morning, the skies over Tokyo had cleared. The Mustangs had departed south, their navigation lights visible for several minutes as they climbed to cruising altitude for the long flight home. In hospitals and aid stations across Tokyo, the human cost was being tallied. Captain Tamajiro Ogawa, the experienced pilot who had engaged Major Moore's Mustang, had not survived. His aircraft had crashed into a residential neighborhood. At 32 years old with 104 combat missions and 25 confirmed victories, Ogawa represented the kind of experienced pilot Japan could not afford to lose. His last radio transmission, recorded by ground control, became prophetic. If they can come this far and fight this long, we have already lost the war. Of the 47 Japanese pilots who engaged American fighters on April 7th, 11 did not survive. Another 14 suffered injuries. 26 aircraft were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. And every surviving pilot carried the psychological burden of having encountered an enemy who operated under fundamentally different rules. The Americans, by contrast, returned to Iwo Jima with all aircraft operational and 0 casualties. Master Sergeant Isamu Sasaki, a veteran with 38 victories, wrote in his diary, "After today, I do not believe we can win. The Americans have shown they can send fighters anywhere in our empire with fuel to spare. Where can we hide? What can we do against enemies who have solved problems we didn't know could be solved?" This sentiment, repeated across dozens of pilot accounts and intelligence reports, represented a psychological defeat that exceeded the material losses of April 7th. April 7th was just the beginning. Between that day and August 15th, 1945, P-51 Mustangs flew 51 very long-range missions against the Japanese home islands. The pattern became routine with terrifying speed. Every few days, Waves of silver Mustangs appeared over Japan, always operating with fuel reserves allowing aggressive combat operations, always returning safely despite the 1,350-mile round trip. Japanese industry struggled to replace losses. Aircraft production facilities, previously protected by distance, became regular targets. The Nakajima plant at Musashino was attacked again on April 15th, this time with fighter bombers carrying 500-pound bombs. Flight training programs collapsed. New pilots arrived at frontline units with as little as 60 hours total flight time. They faced American pilots with 300 hours or more, flying aircraft with capabilities exceeding Japanese equipment in almost every category. The resulting loss rates were catastrophic. In May 1945 alone, Japanese air forces lost 1,062 aircraft to all causes, including 341 to American fighters. Pilot casualties exceeded 800. By August 13th, just 2 days before Japan's surrender, 72 Mustangs flew one of the war's final, very long-range missions. They encountered exactly 4 Japanese fighters, all of which disengaged immediately upon spotting the American formation. The commanding officer later explained, "I could see 50 or more American fighters. My 4 aircraft were all we could get airborne. We would die without accomplishing anything. I chose to preserve my pilots." There would be no next mission. Japan surrendered 2 days later. In the final tally, P-51 Mustangs flying very long-range missions from Iwo Jima achieved results that demonstrated complete operational superiority. 51 very long-range missions were flown between April and August, each one penetrating deep into Japanese airspace with impunity. During these missions, American pilots destroyed 341 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat, systematically dismantling what remained of Japan's fighter forces. The Americans lost 62 P-51s to all causes, including mechanical failures, anti-aircraft fire, and combat damage. But the most telling statistics were the zeros. Not a single mission was aborted due to fuel concerns. Not once did American fighters abandon bombers because they lacked fuel to continue escort duties. The fuel abundance that had seemed impossible to Japanese pilots in April remained consistent through every subsequent mission until war's end. But the statistics don't capture the strategic transformation. The P-51's very long-range capability had fundamentally rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. Japanese aircraft production collapsed under sustained fighter-bomber attacks. Production averaging 1,100 aircraft monthly in early 1944 fell to barely 300 per month by August 1945. B-29 loss rates, which had averaged 5.7% in late 1944, dropped to 1.3% by summer 1945 with fighter escort. Most significantly, Japanese civilian morale collapsed under the psychological weight of American air superiority. Citizens who could see American fighters operating overhead with apparent impunity understood Japan's military situation was hopeless. Years after Japan's surrender, interviews with surviving Japanese pilots revealed the full psychological impact. Major General Minoru Jinda, interviewed in 1951, was brutally honest. When American fighters reached Tokyo in April 1945, intelligence officers understood the war was lost. The Americans had solved fundamental problems we couldn't address. They had created logistical capabilities that made our defensive geography irrelevant. Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, in a 1973 interview, expanded. "We spent years training under certain assumptions. Long-range fighters must conserve fuel. They can't maneuver aggressively. Every assumption proved wrong. The Mustang pilots fought as if fuel was infinite. This was incomprehensible." These testimonies consistently emphasized that the P-51's impact wasn't primarily tactical but strategic. The Mustang had created an operational reality Japanese forces couldn't adapt to, couldn't counter, couldn't survive. Post-war analysis revealed how far behind Japanese aeronautical engineering had fallen. The key, 84 represented excellent engineering within severe constraints, but those constraints were crippling. Manufacturing tolerances that American industry achieved routinely were impossible for Japanese factories lacking precision machinery. Fuel quality was so poor by 1945 that fuel system problems plagued operations. American engineers had designed the Mustang under different assumptions. Operating in the vast Pacific required range. Therefore, every design decision prioritized fuel efficiency while maintaining combat performance. The engine installation minimized cooling drag. The wing airfoil reduced friction drag. The fuselage shape minimized form drag. The cumulative effect was an aircraft that flew 15% farther on each gallon than comparable fighters. Over a 700-mile mission, this 15% efficiency advantage meant the difference between arriving with empty tanks and arriving with an hour of combat fuel remaining. Behind all the statistics were human beings experiencing one of history's most one-sided campaigns. Lieutenant Robert Carr, flying as Major Moore's wingman on April 7th, kept a detailed diary. His April 7th entry captured the moment. "We did it. Tokyo and back, 7 hours 45 minutes airborne. Engaged enemy fighters over the target. Still made it home with fuel to spare. The Japanese pilots fought hard, but they seemed desperate. Like they knew they couldn't win, but came anyway. We had every advantage. It almost felt unfair." His August 15th entry, "War's over. The P-51 won, really. This airplane gave us the reach to hit Japan anywhere, anytime. The Japanese couldn't counter that. All the courage in the world couldn't overcome our logistical and technical advantages." The P-51 Mustang's very long-range missions represented more than tactical success. They represented the complete maturation of American industrial warfare doctrine, the marriage of engineering excellence, manufacturing capacity, and logistical sophistication that created capabilities enemies couldn't match. Japan's military emphasized warrior spirit, tactical excellence, and willingness to accept casualties. These qualities produced remarkable courage and tactical innovations military historians study today. But courage couldn't overcome fuel limitations. Tactical skill couldn't extend range. Willingness to die couldn't create the industrial infrastructure necessary to build aircraft with Mustang-level capabilities. American victory wasn't inevitable because Americans were braver or more skilled. It was inevitable because American industrial capacity, applied systematically to solve specific technical problems, created weapons that made enemy capabilities irrelevant. Captain Masao Osanaga's question from April 7th, "How did they get here?" had a simple answer. American engineers solved problems Japanese engineers couldn't address. American factories built aircraft Japanese factories couldn't match. American logistics sustained operations Japanese logistics couldn't support. The silver fighters that appeared over Tokyo that spring morning weren't just aircraft. They were the physical manifestation of industrial and technological superiority, so complete that geography itself became irrelevant. Today, approximately 150 P-51 Mustangs remain in flying condition worldwide. At air shows, their distinctive sound, the Merlin engine's powerful rumble, is instantly recognizable to aviation enthusiasts. But no museum display can fully capture what this aircraft represented to Japanese pilots who encountered it over their homeland in 1945. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win battles. It rewrote the rules of what was possible in the sky, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from courage or skill, but from solving the impossible problems that others never thought to address.